This is a tutorial aimed at beginners on how to recreate this DuBois spiral chart in Adobe Illustrator. The only prep work you might want to do before following along is if you would like to use a custom color palette, have that already made and imported. And if you would like to use the same fonts as me, which are Public Sans and Charter, you may need to go ahead and import those before we start. It's not necessary for you to do that before following along, but I'm just letting you know that you would need to do that if you want to do it. We're also not going to be creating a new file together today. We're just going to work in the document I already have created because I think it's going to be easier with this example already here. And the last thing I'll say is if you would like your screen to look just like my screen, go up here to Window, go to Workspace, and go to Essentials Classic. That will make sure that all of your buttons are in the same layout as my buttons, which may make it easier for you to follow along. That being said, let's get started. First thing we need to do is create an artboard for our project. So I'm just going to scoot this over here, hit the artboard tool, and I would like to make this 22 by 28 inches and in portrait orientation. Go ahead and hit OK, and I'm going to move it down here to be right next to our first one. Very good. And now we should go ahead and create the background. To create the background, I'm going to go to Layers. I already have a layer called Background, so I'm going to go ahead and unlock it. If you don't already have a layer like me, you would go down here to Create New Layer. You would label it Background, and you would work in that. So I'm going to go ahead and click my background layer. And I'm just going to make a very big rectangle going from corner to corner over my artboard. I want to have it at no stroke and to fill it with my background color. And at this moment, if you had already created a custom color palette, you could go down here, and mine's under user defined, and go ahead and import it. That's already done for me. So now I have a rectangle covering my entire artboard that is the color of my background in my background layer. So I'm going to go ahead and lock background layer so that that does not move around while we create our chart. Okay, now I'd like to explain the idea behind what we're going to do. First, we're going to create this beautiful spiral we see here, just focusing on making sure it looks how we want. And once we've made a spiral that we like the look of, we're going to see what the length of it is and go ahead and make a scale so that when we draw the rest of these lines, they're in proportion to how long the spiral is to represent our data. This works well because this is meant to represent data where you have one category that is way bigger than the rest. You know it's going to be way bigger than the rest. So you can go ahead and just create a spiral that's going to be long and then adjust the rest of your lines based on that, instead of trying to create a spiral that is a specific length from the beginning, if that makes sense. And, if you have your own data, you can think about it a little bit. This right here is going to be like 5 or 6 times bigger than this. So if you know that you have your category is 3 or 4 times bigger, then you may not want such a tight spiral. You may want to have a spiral that only has a couple of times round before you get up here. So that's something you might need to play with when you have your own data. But for now, we know that we want a spiral that's going to have about 4 layers and that this is roughly what our lines are going to look like. So let's go ahead and get started in doing that. To make the spirals, we're going to come up here. And you'll notice there's a spiral tool. We're actually not going to use the spiral tool. We're going to use the polar grid tool. And just to show you why, I'll select the spiral tool for a second. You can see that the spiral it creates is not concentric. It gets bigger as it goes out, and that's not stylistically what we're going for. You see here that these are concentric spirals. It's very beautiful. So that's why we're not using the spiral tool. But if you go to the polar grid tool and you tap once, it's going to bring up this menu. And I want you to adjust it so that you have 0 radial dividers and 10 concentric dividers. And you pick the number of concentric dividers based on how many layers of your spiral you want. So we're going to make 5 layers of our spiral, and we double that number, so we want to make 10 concentric circles on our page. So go ahead and hit OK, and you can see it's made 10 concentric circles for me, which is perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and drag them over here, and while holding Shift, mine's very big, I'm going to shrink this down so it's a little easier to work with. Perfect. Now, I want you to come up here to this Point Select tool, and I want you to drag over the top half of these circles, only the top half. You want to have selected only these points. You see how the red lines are coming out from them? Not these. Because you're going to go ahead and hit Control X and get rid of the top half, and then Control V to bring it back. And just drag it over so it's offset by 1. Just line it up perfectly. Take your time with this. You can actually drag it by the point. There we go. And ta-da! We have now created 2 concentric circles inside of each other, which is almost what we want. We only want 1 concentric circle. So to do that, we simply just have to go through and delete half of these lines. Just go every other. And that is a concentric spiral, just like what we wanted. The next thing we want to do is just make a couple of stylistic adjustments to it. So, dragging over the whole thing. If I come out here to the corner, you can see if I hover, I get this little rotate. I'm going to rotate it until the end of my spiral is somewhere about there. And I'm doing that because I know that I'm going to draw a line tangent to the circle coming out from it. So if you visualize, if I draw a line right here, it's going to come up like this, which is roughly what I want. In fact, I could actually rotate it a little bit more because I'm going to want that line to sort of come across the page. Yeah, you can sort of visualize it. That's going to look good. And it's also quite big right now, so while holding Shift, I'm going to go ahead and just shrink it down until it's about that size, because I think that's going to look good. And the last little stylistic adjustment I want to make is you'll notice here how this spiral tapers off. I'm going to do the same thing on this spiral. So going back to the Point Select tool, just starting from the end, go ahead and delete little sections of this spiral until it's like this, and go ahead and select just this last section of spiral. And when you come over here to Stroke, you can come to Profile and hit the triangle, and that makes a beautiful taper for us. And sometimes Adobe Illustrator does this weird thing where it's going to create it like this for you, which is not what you want. This button here just will flip it. So just make sure the pointy end is going out. Beautiful. To finish off this red section, you want to go ahead and pick the line segment tool, and making sure you start at this last anchor point of your spiral, you can just drag out, and I like mine to come just past the center of the spiral, something like that. Match that 30 point. And I think that looks really good. I want to drag over this whole thing that I've created and go ahead and hit Group. That makes sure this stays together. And I'm going to go ahead and drag it till it's centered in my canvas. Now that we've drawn the spiral, and make sure that you really have the spiral finalized, it's exactly the size that you want it to be, we can go ahead and actually look at how long it is. Adobe Illustrator already knows how long it is. We just need to go hunting in the windows to see that. So come up here to Window, and there's going to be one called Document Info. And under Document Info, there's a little menu, and go ahead and hit Objects. Now we can see all about the objects we have created. So if I go ahead and select this object, I can actually see that its path length is basically 90 inches long, which is perfect because now I can go ahead and create a scale. So I partly left this example here because all of the data is actually written on it in the labels. So I can see that I want 734952 to be what this spiral represents, and I know that's 90 inches long. So using a desk calculator in front of me, I can go to hit 90 divided by 734952, and I can see that I get a scaling factor of 0.00012. And when I take that scaling factor and I multiply it by these other data that I'm going to want to represent, so for example, this 37699, well then I know that if I want a line in proportion with this spiral, I'm going to need to draw it to be 4.61 inches long. So let's go ahead and do that together. We can just draw all of these lines. I'm going to come up to the line tool. I'm going to select and draw. And coming up here to this width value, I'll go ahead and put 4.616. And now this line by length is going to represent this amount of data in proportion with this spiral, which is totally perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this for the rest of my data. So I'm going to draw a line. I know that I want that to be 8025, so let me multiply 8025 by my scaling factor. That should be 0.9827 inches. Perfect. And I'm going to want that to be blue. And our last category of data, go ahead and draw a nice long line. That's 78139 by my scaling factor. So it needs to be 9.568 inches long. Perfect. Now I've drawn all of my lines. I used a little bit of math to make sure that they were all in proportion to each other. And the only thing I have to do is drag them around to make the chart. So let's do that together. I'm going to drag this guy over here. And, oh, it actually looks like I already drew it at the right angle. But I can just go rotate it until it intersects nicely how I want. And this part, to be honest with you, is going to be a little bit fiddly. You're just going to want to drag stuff around until it looks nice. So I have that. Pardon my sneeze. I have this guy, and let's drag this guy. So as you can see, it's actually come out a little imperfectly. So let's just go ahead and fix this together because this is something that could very easily happen to you. So based on the angles that I ended up drawing all of these lines, if I go ahead and center this circle how I want to, it would just go straight off the edge of the page. So what I'm going to do is make sure I have this all grouped, and I'm just going to rotate it. Boop, 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 boop. I'm guessing that something like that is going to look good. And let me go ahead and drag this circle and center it on my page how I'm going to want it. Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and hit ungroup now. And all I have to do is grab this green path I put on the top and let me put it back so it's flat. Zoom in on it. And let me just drag it into place. Zoom out again. Ah, perfect. It only took me 2 tries. Very good. You know, if you were creating something from scratch, you could potentially spend a little while making this look exactly right. You know, I could have made this line angle more this way and this one stick up more like it does over here. But I think this is pretty nice, and I know that everything's to proportion, so let's crack on. The only thing left to do at this point, now that everything's adjusted, is create our titles. So the only one that's really potentially going to be tricky is this curved one here. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to grab a text box and drag it out. And I want it to be per the style guide in font Cambria. I believe I used a 30-point font in the other one. And you're going to make sure everything is in all caps. I think that this curved writing is much easier to read when you split it instead of making it too long. So even though DuBois originally had everything I'm about to write in one line, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here. Just split it. And make sure you've aligned this in the center, and I like to align to the top of the text box. So now that I've written that, I can go up here to Effects, Warp. Oh, pardon me. Make sure you have the text box selected and not the text itself. Yes, there we go. Text box selected, go to Effects, Warp, Arc, and this is something you're just going to play with. You can just drag it back and forth until you get it nicely matching your circle. I was already playing with this earlier, so I think probably something like 53 is going to look good. Let's see. Let's drag it up. It's a little short. If you want to adjust what you've done, make sure to click it again here. It'll bring it up again. Let's make it a little more shallow. Oh, I think that looks great. So that's how you're going to go ahead and create that sort of arched font on the bottom of your spiral. And for the rest of it, it should be pretty much how you would normally expect. Let's just create some more text boxes. Excuse me. I'm not sure why Adobe Illustrator was yelling at me there, to be honest with you. And let's see, our middle one is 734-952. And I'm going to go ahead and center align it, top align it. I'm going to shrink this text box to a more reasonable size and drag it over here to the center. And just bump this font size up. Let's see. Does that look good? There you go. And I'm showing this to you in real speed because you can see that it is just a little bit finicky, and that is completely okay. And let's go ahead and create the rest of our text boxes with the rest of our text. Like I just did, you would keep making the text boxes and write your text and drag it around. I actually, as you can see, already did that over here. So I am just going to copy and paste so that you don't have to watch me type all of this. There you go. And feel free, really. You can see the way in which these two charts differ, right? I didn't make my spirals exactly the same. I didn't put these angles exactly the same. I haven't lined up the text exactly the same. Please feel free, be imperfect, move stuff around, and just see what you like. In this case, for this one, I think this is going to look better a little lower down instead of centered like the other one. I think that's great. Last thing I need to do is create this title. And for the title, you're going to put that in Public Sans Bold. I believe I had picked a 60-point font. And again, in all caps. You can see I ran out of room on my text box. I need to drag it bigger. Go ahead and line that guy up. And that is a finished chart. I hope that you can understand the method in which this was made now and be able to apply it to your own data.